Imagine walking into a party where everyone knows exactly what to say, when to laugh, and how to hold their wine glass with perfect elegance. The conversation flows like a rehearsed symphony. Smiles are radiant, handshakes are firm, and every person seems to embody their role flawlessly. The successful entrepreneur, the devoted mother, the brilliant artist, the compassionate activist. But here's what chills your blood. As you watch more closely, you realize these aren't people anymore. They're performances. Beautiful, polished, utterly convincing performances. The entrepreneur hasn't had an original thought in years, just recycling the same motivational mantras. The devoted mother secretly resents her children, but can't admit it even to herself. The artist creates nothing but variations of what's sold before. The activist's compassion extends only to causes that make them look good on social media. They've become so perfect at being who they're supposed to be that they've forgotten who they actually are. And the most terrifying part? They don't even know they're trapped. This isn't a scene from a psychological thriller. This is your life. This is our collective reality. We're all walking around in carefully constructed prisons, mistaking the walls for the horizon, the bars for the architecture of existence itself. You feel it, don't you? That quiet hum of contradiction beneath your daily routine. You champion environmental causes while ordering another package you don't need. You preach authenticity while crafting the perfect Instagram post. You value deep connection while scrolling past real human suffering without a second thought. This isn't hypocrisy. It's something far more dangerous. It's what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. But the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung understood it as something deeper, the symptom of a soul in prison. Not a prison made of stone and steel, but one constructed from our own ideas, habits, and identities. We are simultaneously the architect, the warden, and the sole inmate of psychic prisons so perfectly designed that we mistake their walls for reality itself. Carl Jung spent his life mapping these interior landscapes of the human soul. He discovered that we build these internal structures for survival, for adaptation, for social acceptance, for psychological protection. But he also issued a terrifying warning. These places of safety inevitably become our tombs. They are not external locations you can find on Google Maps. They are architectures of consciousness, and if you remain unconscious of them, they will silently, systematically destroy everything that makes you truly alive. Today, we're going to explore the 7 most dangerous psychological places Carl Jung warns us to avoid at all costs. But here's the paradox that will change everything. To escape these prisons, you must first have the courage to see that you're already living in one. To understand these dangerous places, you need to grasp a fundamental truth that will shake everything you think you know about yourself. These prisons aren't alien territories imposed on you by some external force. They are exaggerations, pathological extremes of psychological structures that are actually necessary for a healthy life. Think about it this way. You need a social mask to navigate the world, what Carl Jung called the persona. Without it, you'd be fired from your job for telling your boss exactly what you think. Or you'd destroy every relationship by sharing every unfiltered thought that crosses your mind. You need your conscious ego, that vital center of your awareness that makes decisions and maintains your sense of identity. You need archetypal patterns, those universal, inherited templates that help you understand your role as a parent, a leader, a lover, a creator. The danger doesn't lie in having these psychological structures. The danger lies in a specific kind of psychological error that most people never recognize: identification. It's the moment you forget that the mask you're wearing is just a mask. It's the moment you mistake your conscious ego for the totality of who you are. It's the moment you become so possessed by a single idea, emotion, or role that you lose all perspective on the rich complexity of your inner life. Carl Jung called this the peril of one-sidedness. A healthy psyche is like a dynamic ecosystem, a living system of opposites in creative tension. Consciousness balanced with unconsciousness. thinking balanced with feeling, logic balanced with intuition, strength balanced with vulnerability, order balanced with chaos. But here's what happens when you develop one side of your personality to the exclusion of the other. The neglected side doesn't simply disappear. It doesn't politely bow out and leave you alone. Instead, it sinks into the unconscious, where it becomes primitive, autonomous, and hostile. It builds energy in the darkness like a storm system, waiting for a moment of weakness to erupt and sabotage everything you've built. Picture a successful executive who has developed his thinking function to perfection. He can analyze any situation, make logical decisions, and navigate complex business strategies with ease. But he's completely cut off from his emotional life. He sees feelings as weakness, intuition as untrustworthy, and relationships as transactions to be optimized. What happens to all that repressed emotional energy? It doesn't vanish. It festers in his unconscious until one day he finds himself in a completely irrational affair that destroys his marriage, or he has an emotional breakdown that blindsides everyone who thought they knew him. Or consider the person who has developed their feeling function to the extreme. They're incredibly empathetic, emotionally intelligent, and skilled at reading the needs of others. But they've completely neglected their thinking function, dismissing logic as cold and cruel. They make decisions based purely on how they feel in the moment, never developing the intellectual backbone to think through consequences or stand up for principles when emotions run high. They end up being manipulated by anyone who knows how to push their emotional buttons. This is where Carl Jung's psychology intersects powerfully with the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. For Nietzsche, the great task of human life was what he called Selbstüberwindung, self-overcoming. This isn't about becoming perfect or eliminating your flaws. It's about transcending your current self, questioning established norms, and creating your own values rather than passively accepting them from what Nietzsche called the herd. These 7 dangerous places represent the ultimate failure of self-overcoming. They are prisons of conformity, where you've surrendered your unique potential to a pre-written script. Whether that script is provided by society, by a rigid ideology, or by powerful, impersonal forces from the depths of your own psyche, the result is the same. You stop becoming and start merely existing. The tragedy is that most people never realize they're trapped. They live their entire lives thinking they're free while following invisible scripts written by forces they don't understand. They believe they're making choices when they're really just acting out psychological patterns that were set in motion years or even decades ago. Let's take a tour of these 7 psychological prisons. Look closely as we explore each one. You might recognize the architecture. You might already be living in one of them right now. Prison 1. The gilded cage of the persona. You are the perfect employee who never questions company policy, even when it violates your deepest values. You are the ideal parent whose children feel like they're living with a walking parenting manual instead of a real human being. You are the flawless friend who is always available, always supportive, always saying exactly what people want to hear. Your life has become a performance so convincing that you've forgotten you're the actor. This is what Carl Jung called living in the gilded cage of the persona. You've become identical with your social mask. The professor who cannot exist without his textbook. The athlete who doesn't know who she is without her sport. The mother whose entire identity crumbles when her children leave home. The consequence is a life of profound inauthenticity. Your real self, with all its messy, vulnerable, contradictory impulses, is starved in a back room while the polished mask takes center stage. And here's the cruel irony. The more perfect your persona becomes, the more monstrous your shadow grows. Every time you force a smile to be agreeable, you feed the repressed resentment lurking in your unconscious. Every time you project unwavering strength, you nourish the hidden fear and vulnerability that you refuse to acknowledge. The ultimate consequence is collapse. When you lose your job, face a divorce, or hit a midlife crisis, the mask shatters. Suddenly, you're forced to confront what lies behind it. terrifying emptiness where your true self should be. Prison 2. The echo chamber of the one-sided mind. You've found the answer. You've discovered the one true way of seeing the world, and you trust it implicitly while dismissing its opposite as fundamentally flawed. If you're a hyper-rational type, you see emotion as messy and primitive. If you're a hyper-emotional type, you see pure logic as cold and disconnected from human values. You've built a high tower of certainty and cast all opposing views into the darkness below. Carl Jung called this barbarous one-sidedness, and the consequences are devastating. The repressed psychological functions don't simply disappear. They become primitive, hostile, and autonomous. They operate from your unconscious with demonic power. For the person who has banished emotion from their conscious life, those repressed feelings erupt in bizarre and destructive ways. They might find themselves in completely irrational relationships or making wildly illogical decisions that sabotage everything they've built. For the person who has repressed their thinking function, logic returns as paranoid suspicions, conspiracy theories, and superstitious beliefs that undermine their emotional intelligence. This one-sidedness is the psychological root of fanaticism. As Carl Jung observed, fanaticism is always a sign of repressed doubt. When you can't tolerate internal ambiguity, you can't tolerate it in the external world either. You cling desperately to an ideology that promises absolute certainty, creating perfect conditions for psychological possession. Prison 3. The unlit basement of the shadow. You are a good person. You're not greedy, lustful, or pathologically selfish. But somehow, you're surrounded by people who are. Your boss is a tyrant, your neighbors are fools, and politicians are all corrupt. Everyone else seems to embody the very qualities you despise most. This is the experience of living with a deeply repressed shadow. The shadow is Carl Jung's term for everything you refuse to acknowledge about yourself. All the unpleasant, immoral, and shameful aspects of your personality that you've banished from conscious awareness. When you refuse to see this darkness within yourself, you have no choice but to project it onto the world around you. You see your own unacknowledged greed in every capitalist, your own repressed aggression in every activist, your own secret laziness in every person you supervise. You see your shadow everywhere, except in the mirror. And this makes you, as Carl Jung put it, always standing in your own light and falling into your own traps. The repressed shadow doesn't get corrected through projection. It festers in the darkness, growing blacker and denser. It becomes an unconscious saboteur, undermining your best intentions and erupting in moments of weakness through sudden rage, self-destructive behavior, or inexplicable actions that leave you wondering, why did I do that? But here's what most people miss. The shadow isn't just a garbage dump of negativity. It's also a treasure chest of undeveloped potential. Society often forces us to repress valuable traits alongside negative ones. A culture that prizes agreeableness pushes healthy assertiveness into the shadow. A family that values emotional control banishes life-giving passion and spontaneity to the basement. Prison 4. The haunted ballroom of the collective unconscious. You feel a sense of belonging you've never experienced before. You're part of something bigger than yourself. A political movement, a spiritual community, an online tribe. The shared symbols, the unifying outrage, the simple answers to complex questions. It feels like coming home. But you've stopped thinking for yourself. Your opinions are delivered to you daily through carefully curated feeds. Your enemies are chosen for you by algorithmic targeting. You've been absorbed into what Carl Jung called the mass psyche. And you're dancing in the haunted ballroom of the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is the deepest layer of human psychology. A shared reservoir of ancestral experience containing universal patterns that Carl Jung called archetypes. It's the source of myth, religion, and creativity. But its power is overwhelming and impersonal, and the danger is losing your individual consciousness to its suggestive influence. When you join a mass movement, you risk becoming what Carl Jung called a particle in the mass, where 100 intelligent heads massed together make one big fat head. Your individual ego, the seat of reason and moral choice, dissolves into the collective identity. You become a puppet acting out primitive archetypal patterns without conscious awareness. This is the psychology behind every mob, whether it's a physical crowd or a digital swarm. The collective unconscious offers tremendous creative and spiritual power, but direct, unmediated contact with it is annihilating to individual consciousness. Prison 5, the throne room of the inflated ego. You feel superior to those around you. You're special, chosen, more enlightened than the masses. You're the center of every conversation. You react with defensive anger to any criticism, and you have a compulsive need for constant validation. You've built a throne for yourself in the center of your personal universe and declared yourself king. But the kingdom is built on quicksand. This grandiosity is what Carl Jung called ego inflation, an unconscious expansion of your personality beyond its proper limits. The inflated ego is actually a fragile defense mechanism, an overcompensation for deep-seated, unconscious feelings of inferiority. The more worthless you feel in the depths of your shadow, the more you must puff yourself up in your conscious life to avoid that painful truth. This inflated state is inherently unstable and requires constant maintenance. It needs a steady diet of flattery, praise, and in our modern world, likes and followers to keep from collapsing. The psychological process operates exactly like an addiction. The validation provides a temporary high that masks the underlying pain, but tolerance builds and you need ever-increasing doses to get the same effect. When the validation stops, the throne crumbles and you plummet into what Carl Jung called negative inflation, the equally egocentric conviction that you're worthless and inferior to everyone else. Prison 6, the neverland of the eternal child. You're full of potential. You're brimming with brilliant ideas, creative sparks, and a profound disdain for the compromises required by the system. But you avoid commitment like it's toxic waste. You live what Carl Jung called a provisional life, always waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect partner, the perfect opportunity before you truly begin. This is the prison of the puer aeternus, the eternal child who has a general fear of life and avoidance of responsibility. You substitute fantasy for reality, endlessly dreaming of achievements without taking the concrete steps to make them real. Your relationships are narcissistic projections. You fall in love with your ideal of a person, not the real, flawed human being standing in front of you. When that ideal is challenged by reality, you disappear. The consequence is that your magnificent potential is never realized. You remain forever on the verge of greatness, trapped in a romantic fantasy that protects you from the messy, difficult work of actually becoming someone. Prison 7, the temple of the possessing archetype. You're no longer just yourself. You've become an avatar for something greater. The healer, the revolutionary, the wise teacher, the great mother. You feel an electrifying sense of purpose, as if you're a conduit for divine energy. But it's not your energy. You've been possessed by an archetype, and your temple has become your prison. You're living a story that's already been written instead of authoring your own. Your personality development has stopped. You're simply wearing an archetypal costume. This is the most profound form of self-abandonment. You've surrendered your unique individuality to a universal pattern. If your ego isn't strong enough to withstand the overwhelming emotional power of archetypal possession, the result can be a complete shattering of your personality. Escaping these 7 prisons isn't a passive process of therapy or self-help. It's an active, heroic act of rebellion against the tyranny of your own unconscious patterns. It requires immense courage and a willingness to descend into the very places you fear most. But you don't have to go unarmed. Carl Jung developed specific tools, navigator's arts, for the perilous journey into the depths of the psyche. Tool 1. Dream analysis, Your dreams aren't random neurological static. They are, as Carl Jung discovered, a spontaneous self-portrayal in symbolic form of the actual situation in the unconscious. They're coded messages from what he called the self, the organizing center of your entire psyche. Your dreams show you the layout of your psychological prison and, if you learn to read them correctly, the location of the keys to your freedom. The Jungian approach treats dreams with reverence. Record them in detail, explore your personal associations with the images, connect them to conflicts in your waking life, and understand their compensatory function, how they seek to balance the one-sidedness of your conscious attitude. Tool 2. Active imagination. This isn't passive daydreaming or wishful thinking. Active imagination is a conscious, deliberate dialogue with the personified figures of your unconscious. You invite your shadow, your inner critic, your abandoned dreams, or the archetypal figures that haunt you into a conversation. You give them form, listen to what they have to say, and argue with them from the standpoint of your conscious ego. This is how you transform your psychological jailers into guides. It's how you become creatively independent, taking an active role in the drama of your own psyche instead of being its unconscious victim. Tool 3. Ethical integration. Here's where most people fail in their journey toward psychological freedom. The insights gained from dreams and active imagination are worthless if they remain mere knowledge. Carl Jung was adamant that insight must be converted into an ethical obligation. The images and revelations from your unconscious place tremendous responsibility upon you. You must take what you've learned in the inner world and apply it concretely in your daily life. This is the bridge from knowing to being. The difference between remaining an eternal child with sterile knowledge and becoming an individuated adult who embodies wisdom through action. The true rebellion isn't just seeing the prison walls. It's the daily, difficult work of dismantling them brick by brick, choice by choice, conversation by conversation. Here's the final revelation that will transform how you see everything. Escaping these 7 dangerous places doesn't mean you arrive at a state of perfect, conflict-free bliss. That's a childish fantasy that keeps you trapped in the very prisons we've been exploring. The goal isn't perfection, it's wholeness. And wholeness means integrating all the disparate, conflicting parts of yourself. Your light and your shadow, your rationality and your emotion, your conscious persona and your unconscious depths. This is where Carl Jung's path of individuation converges with Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy of self-overcoming. To be whole is to have all your raw psychological materials laid out before you, like an artist's palette. The next task, the greater task, is to become an artist of your own soul. You must survey all the strengths and weaknesses of your nature and, as Nietzsche urged, give style to your character, a great and rare art. You must fit all your contradictory elements into an artistic plan until each appears as art and reason and even weaknesses delight the eye. You don't eliminate your shadow. You use its dark colors to create depth and contrast in your psychological masterpiece. You don't destroy your persona. You learn to wear it with grace and flexibility as a useful tool rather than a suffocating cage. You don't banish your archetypal patterns. You learn to dance with them without being possessed by them. This leads to the most profound realization of all. These 7 dangerous places aren't mistakes to be erased from your life's ledger. They aren't detours from your true path. They are the path. They are the chaos from which you must create your own order. They are the resistance against which your soul grows strong. The time you spent trapped in these psychological prisons wasn't wasted. It was the necessary apprenticeship for your own becoming. Every moment of confusion, every period of being lost, every experience of psychological possession or inflation was teaching you something essential about the architecture of consciousness itself. True freedom isn't the absence of these inner dungeons. It's the conscious ability to navigate them without being imprisoned. It's the courage to descend into the basement of your shadow and return with its gold. It's the wisdom to wear your persona as a functional tool, not a second skin. It's the strength to hear the siren song of the collective without being dashed upon its rocks. This understanding brings us to what Nietzsche considered his most profound concept, Amor Fati, the love of one's fate. It means wanting nothing in your past to be different. Not the triumphs, not the humiliations, not the moments of clarity, not the years spent lost in the labyrinth of your own psyche. It means looking back on your entire journey and affirming all of it with a resounding yes, because every experience was necessary to forge the unique, unrepeatable individual you're becoming. You're not just escaping psychological prisons. You're transforming their stones into the foundation of your own singular palace of consciousness. That is the ultimate truth Carl Jung discovered. And it's the ultimate freedom available to every human being brave enough to undertake the hero's journey into their own depths. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these dangerous places. You will. The question is whether you'll remain their unconscious prisoner or become their conscious master. The choice, as always, is yours.